You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Once again, happy to be back with you on another week. We're going to talk some football again. That's what we like to do here. That's the best part, right? We got basketball, we got gymnastics. Those are great sports, and they're good. But we want to talk some football. And there was a spring game on Saturday, so we have a little bit more public information. So we'll talk about that. But I do have a guest with us today. I'll get to that in just 1 second. Let me tell you about our partners, Canyon View Credit Union. Every possibility begins with a spark, and a possibility can grow into something even better than expected. With a clear view of what matters most, your possibilities are endless. From its first flicker at the University of Utah, UFirst Credit Union has grown to meet its potential and ignites your possibilities. They've grown into Canyon View Credit Union. Same roots, new path. Welcome to Canyon View Credit Union. Check out the full details at canyonviewcu.com. All right. So we, as I said, we have a special guest joining us today, and that special guest is the one and only Bryan Brown. Bryan, how you been, man?
I'm good. I feel like special guest is more commentary on my inability to keep my general life together than it is any particularly good insight that I bring to the program. But more than anything, I'm just happy to be here. Throwback to Isaac Austin. For those who know, you know. If you know, you know.
If you know, you know. I love it.
Yeah, I remember his introductory press conference, and that, I mean, that right there tells you how old I am. And every answer was just, I'm just happy to be here. I'm just happy to be here. And that was just, I get that, Big Ike. You and me both, buddy.
I'm happy you're here too, man. It's a good day. We're gonna talk some football. Let me kind of let's set the groundwork here for a little bit. Real quick, I want to update you about transfer portal stuff. We'll talk about that real briefly. Then we'll get into the spring game. We'll kind of talk about kind of all the different position groups, kind of standouts, different things like that. We can go break it down, maybe offense, defense, stuff like that. And then maybe we'll get into some other stuff after that. But that's kind of what we'll get into. So first off, transfer portal. The portal opened last week. I believe it opened the day that I did my last podcast, and I think that was almost a week ago. So I think it was last Wednesday. So we're not quite to the full 10 days. Just as a reminder, the transfer portal isn't one of those things where all players have to be signed in that 10-day period. It's just you have to declare your intent to transfer in that 10-day period. So far, no player from Utah has really left. You've had a few people that we talked about previously, Wyatt Becker and two corners. That was at the beginning of spring ball, so that's not really a surprise. But beyond that, there hasn't been anybody that's left yet. That's not to say that there won't be guys, whether they be former walk-ons or guys that maybe are lower depth players that will leave. But this morning, Utah did get a corner transfer in J.C. Hart. We'll learn more about him and different things that way. He comes from Auburn. So you get an SEC corner. How about that, Bryan?
So now you got a pair of them, right, with Don Saunders there. So good upgrade for Utah. I think it's, watching the game on television and listening to a lot of the interviews especially with Kyle and Morgan, you knew that the transfer portal was going to be a priority.
Yeah.
And I think even watching the game, you could tell, this is not the same Utah team that we've seen in years past. It doesn't have the level of depth and the level of athleticism that I think we're used to watching. And so in that respect, the portal is an important piece to this. But also, I heard things from Kyle that I'd never heard before where, talking about the 105 player roster limit. And we can talk a little bit about the guys who left. Wyatt Becker, that's not a big surprise to me, especially with the number of guys that they recruited over the top of him. He was a good high school prospect, a 3-star. I don't think they had any plans for him to be part of the depth chart this year. And, for him, I think it's better to go to a school where you can get some legitimate experience and reps rather than just playing on the practice squad here at Utah, because as much as we've glorified that role over the years, it is a little bit of being a tackling dummy for a very intense defense. And, I don't blame anybody who doesn't want to be a part of that. I've said it time and time again, this is a tough program to play in. And you really have to be bought into everything that it asks, and not even asks, but demands of you. And if you're not, go somewhere else. Like I think that's the one benefit to the transfer portal is the guys who are not bought in, who are not, built to handle it. Like I love Utah. I've been going to games since I was 3 months old. I don't know if I could have played in this program. Like it's really tough, and I played in a pretty tough program, respectfully. But they do demand a lot out of you, and because of that, you get a lot back. And all this to say is, with J.C. Hart coming in, I think it's a sign of what Utah's really looking for, right? They want to upgrade that talent. They want to get that athleticism there. He's an SEC corner, so even if he didn't get a lot of game experience, he played at an SEC school where he's going up against SEC level players every single day. And so whatever it is, and we've seen it before with the guys that Utah's brought in. I mean, they've done a good job of identifying players that can fit their system and who can excel in the transfer portal, but they've got to get some depth, and especially at the corner position.
Yeah, absolutely. This portal period especially is more depth, I'd say, than trying to find somebody that's going to be a day one starter. Now, with that said, as we've talked about in the past, Utah's going to try to find more depth at wide receiver. And at wide receiver or even at corner, I would say those are the positions where you could probably get more playing time quickly than kind of maybe some of these other positions, right? Utah's obviously going to be looking for defensive tackles. They're going to try to find some depth to be able to put in there. But I think by and large, this isn't a portal period where Utah's worried about what they have. They've got some great frontline guys. They've got some guys that are going to be great contributors. They feel confident in what they have. It's more really just adding to that depth. And obviously, we've seen over the last few years, injuries play a part in this, right? You never want to be able to have that. But if you can get these guys that can come in here that are committed to the system, that helps. Obviously, Utah has, they're well known for their defensive structure. They understand how it goes. You get a guy in there, if you can find the field as a defensive player, that means the coaches trust you. That means you've got a lot of potential and you're going to do a lot of good things. Offensively, we're starting to learn that, right? Kyle Whittingham changed it where he wants more of a plug-and-play offense. He wants something that can be much more simplistic in terms of being able to learn. This isn't the Andy Ludwig Bible where you have to spend 2 years maturing into the system. And so I'm really fascinated to kind of see the transfers that come into this portal period and kind of how they acclimate in this fall. In the past, if you transferred in this time of the year under Andy Ludwig, you either had to be a very special player that could understand the system very well, or, you were kind of left behind. And so I think with Jason Beck, you're getting a better system where it's much more similar to what a lot of guys are running now. It's the RPO, it's the spread. There's a lot of things that you can get in there. Kyle talked about it being a lot of things that are kind of told to these players as they get up to the line of scrimmage. The wide receiver knows that if I'm the X receiver, I'm doing this. It's not necessarily worrying about the checks from the defense or different things that way. So really fascinated to kind of see what Utah does offensively in this portal period, simply because they can, I want to see how they, mature these guys into the system, knowing, day one is still going to be hard for no matter what player comes in. But I think, this new system has the potential to work for Utah. I mean, are you seeing anything different on your side? I know that you haven't been in knee deep in a lot of this stuff, but based on what you've seen in the past, kind of what benefits do Utah have now getting into this portal period than maybe in years past?
Yeah, we were texting the other day about a certain player, and I was like, I need to get eyes on him to see how legit it is, because it's just different watching film versus being there at practice, and that is the one part that I miss, is getting to see that day-to-day aspect. But that being said, you can see enough, and I think it was very strategic of Utah to make sure that they held the spring game the way that they did it, because they really showcased the offense. And I think, to wrap up all these thoughts into one ball, I think they are very confident in what they have up front. All 5 starters sat out the spring game for the offensive line. That's usually a plus side. And I think even more than that, you saw guys who were backups, some guys who haven't even played at all at Utah, played really well. And so that's either it's one of two things. It's either they're really confident in their depth on what they have depth-wise in the offensive line, and I really believe that is part of it. I think I do have some concerns at the center position, but we can talk about that later. But it is clear that they need bodies, and I think the biggest thing they need is, because this is now, you mentioned it's more of a modern offense. To me, this looks like a Big 12 offense, and what I mean by that is you're working the sidelines a ton, a lot of sideline throws. We saw that with some of the tunnel screen actions, with that little RPO they run where quarterback has the option to throw, pitch, or run the ball, which I think it's funny because I look at it and it kind of feels a little gimmicky, but that is the modern day offense, in college football. And it was interesting. Britton Covey mentioned on the broadcast, like, you can do some things and spread some things out so you get a light box that helps you with your offensive line. These are all things that I've complained about for years, with Utah, where they were so I don't want to say maybe confident, a little overly so in believing in what they had talent-wise, to where it's like, our best, we can just beat you every single time. And, in college football, they were just a little bit behind the times in the sense of, like, things evolved on them and changed on them to where it's like that wasn't the same game. And so this system fits the modern game, I think, a lot more. But it is very clear that they need bodies. And I think they need bodies in particular areas. I think they definitely need help at the wide receiver position. That's not to say they don't have good guys there. You just need bodies. You look at teams that excel and go into the playoffs, they have a ton of depth and a ton of athleticism at the wide receiver position. I think J.C. Hart helped stem a little bit of what they lost early in the season. It's kind of weird to see like Sammy Hunter leave and just see those early departures. But I think that is, again, speaks to this era of football. Like, if a kid's unhappy, they're just going to go, and so NIL is such a weird time. It's in the sense of, like, it's just not what I'm used to. It's not what I grew up seeing and all that kind of stuff. And I have, the same beefs that I think a lot of people do with it, where it's just like, I'm watching the game on Saturday and I still have to check the roster for numbers, and trying to figure out who everybody is and names and stuff like that. And it's crazy because, 20, 30 of these guys are probably going to be on this roster cycle too. And, I thought Kyle said something interesting where he said with 105, player limit, roster limit, that really changes the dynamic of who gets to stay and who doesn't. And there's a lot of, I shouldn't say that like that. There are going to be some guys who are going to be encouraged to look elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And that's the hard part about it too, is that, somebody's going to get their dreams crushed. And it's not because, the big bad, Utah football staff is evil and they don't want to give people opportunities. It's because their hands have been forced in this. And you have to have guys on the roster who can do the job. It can't be this development thing for everything. They've got a lot of great high school kids coming in that they're planning on developing. And so you can't keep some of those middle tier guys on the roster that maybe aren't showing out right now. And yeah, I think the heartbreaking part about it for me is, like, for a lot of these guys, they don't know it, but this is going to be the end of their college careers. Mm-hmm. And that's just tough.
Yeah, and this is the hard part, right? So the 105 number comes from the NCAA settlement that's expected to pass here soon. It's still currently in debate in court. I think we're getting closer. Honestly, by July 1st is when it's supposed to happen. So as long as it happens by July 1st, I think everyone's fine with it. But there's, every single athletic department in the country has essentially been making these moves as if this settlement is going to get passed. And so there may be some nuances to it. There may be some things, grandfathered in, something that way. But as of right now, the plan is for Utah to get down to 105 players. Now, this isn't 105 scholarships. This is simply 105 players. So the day of the walk-on is essentially over. It exists still, but it's in a different way because now these players have to be paid in some respect, right? And so it's a good thing for the players that they get some money. How that's prorated or how that's divvied up, still remains to be seen. But this is a situation now where they have to run with 105 players. Now, that sounds like a ton of players. The NFL goes with 53 guys, and they have, roughly 10 or so practice squad guys. I think it's actually down to 8. And so there's not a lot of players, in the NFL. It's a different system, though, because you can go pick up new players if you have an injury or different things that way. College, you're set. Yes, there's transfer portals, and obviously this time of the year is different, but there's no real area where you can just say, hey, I'm going to go pick up this guy off of the waiver or something like that. And so usually Utah has run anywhere between 110 to 120 players, where they have a lot of those guys are practice squad guys on walk-ons, not scholarships, but they're walk-ons. They're trying to prove their mettle to be able to get there. And Utah has had guys that have done that. Some are more special, quote unquote. They're preferred walk-ons. Devon Vele was a preferred walk-on, kind of guaranteed a scholarship, so to speak. And you can obviously see what he did. He's in the NFL now, catching passes. So there are paths there. I think it's just going to be much more challenging. some of this is going to be natural attrition, guys that are just simply going to leave because they see kind of the writing on the wall. Others will be Kyle Whittingham and staff saying, hey, we just don't have a place for you. But they also have to do that while juggling adding new players. And so it's a challenge, and I don't want to get bogged down too much on the transfer portal. The day it closes is on Friday. So any Utah player that wants to put themselves in the portal, which based on what Whittingham said, that shouldn't be too many, if at all, they have to be in by Friday. There may be a day or so grace period based on when the athletic department gets that in, so you may hear some after that. But by Sunday, you should know who is on Utah's roster in terms of leaving. So with that said, let's jump into spring. I don't need to talk transfer portal anymore. There's obviously a lot we can do there. There's guys that will be added, right? Utah's still going to look hard at corner still. It's not like J.C. Hart is the only guy. You've got that wide receiver, defensive tackle. They'll continue to look at quarterback. They'll continue to look at some other positions. One note on that I'll say is that Kyle said it's not that they're necessarily looking for a position. They're just looking for dudes, right? They're trying to find guys that are going to be impactful on the team. So I think that was the most interesting. You have something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think watching the game, and I've got it going on in the background here, so if I divert attention just because of that, and I just watched the catch from Mana Carvalho, and it's that pop athleticism is really what Utah's looking for, that and size, and I think look at that. That's production on the fly.
I'm fancy. If you're watching on YouTube, I just pulled that up for Bryan. I didn't even have to try hard. I'm just kidding.
This is why Josh is the best in the business, because he's doing stuff like this. I don't even know how to clip things. In fact, the other night when I was rewatching the spring game, I was about ready to throw my remote because there's no huddle clicker on ESPN Plus, so I may have to raise some heck with somebody over there.
Do it,
or else figure out some alternative means of getting my football fix this fall. But when you're rewatching the games, you just notice the things that are missing. It's size up front and it's athleticism on the edges, and so that's really what Utah's looking for. Is they just need guys, and a lot of it is just to give a look in practice and help other guys develop. You mentioned walk-ons. I think Jackson Benny's a great example of what this rule is really going to start to squeeze. Devon Vele, another guy that I mean, it's kind of insane. We used to say if you're good, they'll find you, and that's not the case anymore. Recruiting has just changed so much, and I think NIL. Maybe we'll just put a pause on NIL talk for the rest of the pod, but recruiting has changed so much that it's not the one where it's Ron McBride sleeping in his car in front of a player's house, waiting for them to come out so they can interrupt him and get him to come to university anymore. You have to be able to cover ground in different ways, and so there are guys who get skipped, and I think you and I deal a lot more with the local high school space, and so we understand that there are great players at this level. Jackson Benny comes from an Olympus program that probably should have 2 or 3, maybe even 4 D1 level players coming out of it every year, and so guys do get skipped, and so that's what you're looking for is either guys who have maybe been skipped or guys who are unhappy, guys that you had on your radar that went somewhere else. I think we saw that with Don Saunders. That's one of those positives of building those relationships is you can get some of those. I guess we can call them bounce back guys. And it's just the biggest thing is just filling out that roster and getting that athleticism and those guys that have those measurables. I think that Utah's always looked for because if Mana's the one guy that pops athletically during the course of the spring game, that does give me some pause. Now, I think if I'm saying that, I'm obviously bearing the lead, which is Devon Dampier Heisman season, sure, let's run with it. I'm all in. I saw things, on Saturday that were just okay, we're here. And the thought crossed my mind, and maybe we'll start off this discussion with this question. I think he's got a better arm than Cam Rising, and I know that's treading in very dangerous territory. But you saw some things from him and from the Utah offense that we haven't really seen. Some of those back shoulder deep balls where he just he's able to layer throws in a way that, especially with the deep throws. I think it was the one to Luca Caldarella that was impressive. The one to Zach Williams was even more impressive, and you can see it right here. It's just he drops back and just throws it right on a dime. In a place where only Luka can go get the ball, and it ends up being 6. And he was putting that kind of stuff on tape last year with with New Mexico, and he was doing it against teams like Auburn, making these throws. You look at that ball to Zach Williams, and it literally hits him in the elbow, Josh. Like
it's incredible.
That is
honestly.
as pinpoint. It's as pinpoint as you can get. I don't think you can throw a better ball. And someone said oh, it's a nice one-handed catch, and I was like, yeah, it is. But literally all Zach had to do was just grab his hand and clamp around the ball because it was right where it needed to be.
Do you remember the play years ago where I can't remember? It was an SEC game, I believe, where the quarterback just threw the ball. The receiver had no idea that was there, and it just lands in his arm. That was kind of the reminiscent of that, right? Where it's just oh, hey, there's a ball here. Yeah. Zach didn't have to do much. Yeah. Zach's a talented player, so I'm not trying to take away from him, but that's how good that pass was.
Well, I think what was great about the spring game, too, is that you saw some other guys get into it and showcase the fact that they believe they have some guys in the wide receiver core. And I think really what you're looking for is that variety of of guys who can come in and play. Creed Whittemore caught a couple passes. Luca Caldarello looked good. I think Zach Williams is very – very definitively the number one wide receiver, and for good reason. I think he's going to grow in that role. I think he's got some confidence that'll help. Nakari, we're going to get it right. Nakari, whichever one it is, shoot me a text, Paul.
Rogers.
If you're listening. Rogers is going to be a big part of the offense in terms of catching the ball. I think we'll see him in the run game as well, but they did a lot of that at New Mexico, and I think – mostly we saw him running the ball because Wayshawn Parker wasn't there. And I think they've got some depth at the running back position, and so they'll use a lot of those guys as receiving running backs, kind of the way that Utah used Mekhi Bernard for so long. And so there's a lot of options and a lot of opportunity for Devon Dampier out there. And really, I think if you're comparing quarterbacks, and I don't know that we even want to get to this point yet, but where Devon's at, it's the skill set is there. Now it's time to really improve on the decision making. Whereas with Cam, his skill set was there, but his decision making was always right here. And so that's what you're looking for, and that's I think a lot of what you're seeing in the spring game from him is just wow, there's so much potential and talent here. So how quickly can they make him an elite decision maker?
I want to stay on this point, but first let me just remind people: spring games, take them with a grain of salt, right? Don't buy the gospel of spring. I was talking to one unnamed member of the coaching staff that just said he's frustrated because they can't really showcase much, right? They want to be able to, they want to show more as well. And so this was a very vanilla offense, very vanilla defense. You're doing it for multiple reasons. You're trying to do it to preserve guys' health. You're trying to not give anything away before you go into fall. That gives you a good 4-ish months to prep for stuff if you give everything. And so take what Utah did with a grain of salt, right? Just because you saw a ton of screen passes doesn't mean that's going to be the only thing that they do, right? There will be more screen passes. And I think Utah's finally to a point where they have the depth and the talent to run an effective screen pass, whether it be the bubble screen, the tunnel screen, whatever you want to call that they're going to run. They're not going to necessarily get blown up 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage that they used to back in the Travis Wilson days, right? This is going to be a much more effective offense. So take all that with a grain of salt, but at the same time, there are some things that we can point to. So with that being said, I think I want to jump into your topic of Devon Dampier, because Cam Rising is one of those guys that everybody kind of revered, right? Obviously, the end of his collegiate career kind of got a little dicey. There's a lot of rumors of how it kind of shook out. We're not going to get into that. The reality is though Cam Rising was a limited quarterback. Like you said, the thing that really separated him and his talent was his mind. The dude was brilliant, and he could see what the defenses were doing before they even understood in some respects, right? He could get in there, he understood what they were doing, and he could try to manipulate it to a way where he could help that. That's what made him so effective in Andy Ludwig's system, is because he was the guy that understood the Bible. He understood how it worked, and so he could help guys get into formation, or he could help guys in what they needed to do. But the reality was his throwing mechanics were limited, right? He could never really get that deep pass. He had some chances, and he was developing that, but it never really materialized. I think everybody was expecting this last year too. There was a lot of talk about, he's really kind of getting more into the depth of his arm. He was doing things better, but it never showcased, right? And so this isn't a knock to say that Cam Rising wasn't a talented quarterback. It's just they're different, right? And there's a reason why Utah and every other team in the country wants a Devon Dampier. They want that skill set where if he can improve those passing numbers that he had at New Mexico, which we're fine. They're not like horrible, but they're definitely not the level that you need to be able to compete at the Big 12. If you can get those numbers up, even just marginally, and then you pair that with what he's able to do in the ground game, there's nothing that these defenses can do to stop you. That's why the Jaden Daniels, that's why the Caleb Williams, that's why these guys are so effective, is because they're so challenging to stop. I've been on record on this podcast several times. I think that Devon Dampier is very much so in the very same arc of a Jaden Daniels, where you come in, you weren't necessarily the most flawless quarterback, you had some opportunities. If he can make the steps that he made when he transferred, I think Devon Dampier can absolutely be in that range. If you can get that completion number, 65%, get it up to closer to 70%, man, the sky's the limit for this guy, because there's just so much what they can do. You talk to these defensive players, they say it really frustrates them what he can do because there's just no stopping him. He can come in there, he can do what he needs to, he can make the pass, but he also has the option to pitch it. He has the option to run it. And it's not just like, what we've seen. Cam could run it, right? But it was very much so like, I think he was faster than many people thought, but he also just wasn't this breakaway speed guy where he can hit the holes or kind of juke out some guys. Devon Dampier is a completely different guy. There was one pass in particular, and unfortunately I don't have video of this one, but like obviously the quarterbacks in spring, they're not live, and so you can, it's either a touch or it's a whistle before they get blown down as a sack. And the pocket around him collapsed. And he's doing this with second-tier guys, and I don't think he got one sack that whole game, maybe one if it was. But he's got the pocket that's collapsing. He literally ducks out of it. The refs don't call it sack accurately because it wasn't. He ducks out of it, and as he's on the run, he hits Landon King 20 yards down the field on a sideline catch that was perfectly placed. Like, those are those types of plays where you can't manage that, right? The biggest worry that you have there is the illegal man downfield because the offensive line thinks he's running, and you get that. Outside of that, the sky's the limit for this guy. And I don't want to hype him up before we've really seen him, but at the same time, like, there's so many things that you saw just even once he got comfortable in that system on Saturday where there's so much potential there. If he stays healthy, Utah is really in a special situation.
Yeah, I think so. And really what you're watching for in spring ball is you're not watching to see like how good are we today. You're looking to see what the potential is. What can a team grow into? Where are the limitations? Where are the ceilings at? And how do we raise those ceilings? I think when you talk about the scheme, for example, what you're seeing in the spring game is the base offense, and what remains to be seen, and why coaches, especially offensive coaches, get frustrated is like, I've got so much stuff built off of this that we're gonna run, and that's the part that's like that we don't get to see, in the game. That I think you'll see a lot more in the fall is there's a lot more packages, there's a lot more opportunity. The other thing too is like this defense has seen the same plays for the last 3 to 4 weeks. Like, yeah. They're well aware of what's coming, and so I think just kind of a little football 101. When you're playing on offense, the goal is to create doubt in the defender's mind, and you do that in two ways: either by being just a better player, or by making them think. And when you can get them to hesitate just that little bit, that gives you that advantage. It gives you that space. And I think a lot more of this offense is built around what I like to call eye candy in the backfield. Mm-hmm. You've got we're coming off Easter, so there's a lot of peeps in the backfield right now.
Who's
right?
the Reese's?
And so you're, man, so we didn't even get to the Reese's in the spring. That's the frustrating part about it. Like,
it's true.
Give me my eggs. Give me my Reese's eggs.
That's your lineman, aren't they? You're going to go with the Reese's as the lineman.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. I hope the big fellas got good Reese's eggs in their Easter baskets on Sunday.
Devon Dampier treated them to some goodness.
At the very least. Like give them a bag, man. A bag each. It's 50% off today. That's an insider tip right there. The day after Easter is the best time to go shopping for candy.
And the eggs Reese's are the best. I just have to say that.
Hands down. And it's the best Reese's too. Like, there's no better shape. They've tried with Christmas trees and everything else. It's Reese's eggs and then everything else. It's behind the thing. And I think that's what we're talking about in terms of Devon Dampier's talent, his physical ability, is he is the Reese's eggs of quarterbacks. And that's not a knock on Cam Rising because, you mentioned the differences. Like, Cam is a very downhill runner. He has that straight line speed, but he also wanted to drop his shoulders a little bit and run into dudes and then break some tackles and get, once he got outside, that touchdown run from the Rose Bowl is running through my head right now as I talk about this. That's an example of where he is in terms of being an athlete and having good speed. Devon can make guys miss in ways that's completely different. And I think this is a unique conversation because we haven't really dived into it yet, but the offensive line, I think how good they're going to be, there's a lot of conversation. People are going to see things in that first game, and everybody's going to come at me in the mentions. And hey, bring it on. You know where to find me, at Bryan Brown SLC. We'll talk through this because, I'm a big believer that everybody sees what they see. Let's just explain it. You're going to see some things where it's just like, wait a second, I thought you said this offensive line was great. And the evolution for this offensive line is going to be protecting a guy that's 5'11", maybe 6 feet on a good day, or with an additional set of cleats or whatever it is that we're doing, whatever tricks we're putting in the book. And so you're going to have to open up lanes and do things differently than you normally do. And I think that's the other part about the Devon Dampier experience that's going to be a little bit different as people watch it, right? Cam was a legit 6'2", almost 6'3". And so that gives you enough of an angle to see over, and work inside the pocket. And I feel like he was so underrated in terms of his pocket presence.
Mm-hmm.
It was so good, Josh. It was so good. And I think Devon is unique because he's very good escapability-wise. He's going to have to learn to find those lanes that the offensive line creates for him. And by lanes, what I'm talking about is gaps in the protection where he can throw to and he can see. All right. So a big thing in modern football now is trying to open up the B gap. The B gap is between guard and tackles. And so you're going to try and open up those throwing lanes to get things down the field. I think that's a change in this offense, right? And maybe that's part of what we didn't see is that there's more throws down the field towards the middle that Utah wants to make in this offense. We saw a lot of sideline stuff, and sideline stuff is safe. It's easy. It's replicable. You can do a lot of it. It's one of those throws that everybody has to have in the arsenal. I do think that they're going to want to get some stuff downfield as the season progresses, and as they get some guys that develop. Like, I think Luca Caldarella is a good target in that regards because he's big. You got a lot of size and go up and get balls. I think Hunter Andrews is unique in that respect too. I think I finally saw what everybody else saw. He's just an extremely fluid athlete. If he has some explosion to get upwards too, that could help a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Landon King is a perfect example of this, and why I think they wanted him to stay and fit in this offense. They're not going to use the tight ends as much as Utah has in the past, but you want that big target down the field. In fact, I'm just watching a play right now, and it unfortunately Landon dropped the ball, and he had a couple of those on Saturday. That'll be something that he's got to get on top of, and he will. He's a kid that has been through a lot mentally and everything else, and he'll get improved. But they're running him in essence from the slot, running him across the middle, and Bert Ficklin finds him because he's 6'5".
Yeah, exactly.
And that's exactly what you want. And so I think as Utah builds this offense and just to stay on point, because I can tend to wander. The Reese's eggs, or where this offense needs to get to, is finding that ceiling. And I think it's really hard because they're not there yet, but they know what they have. And I think you saw a little bit of that in the spring game. And maybe we can parlay this into a conversation about the offensive line. I think even more so we saw that because they didn't even play any of the starters. And that to me was very, very telling.
It's funny because I haven't shared with you my show plan today, and you're like hitting it right in stride. So I think we're doing well. So I think that's the most interesting thing here is the offensive line, the starting offensive line, which we've heard a ton about going into this spring, about it just being so, it's a veteran unit. It's a great unit that has really developed. They've played together. It's obviously anchored by your two tackles in Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu, who are getting a ton of praise, especially Fano, who is, arguably one of the best tackles in the country right now. They've got that line, right? And the fact that Dampier was able to do what he did with the second unit shows the depth, right? And the depth matters because obviously injuries are going to happen, and I'm not worried about that one necessarily yet. But I think if you can kind of extrapolate that based on what Dampier was able to do at New Mexico, now you have a much better offensive line. In your opinion, what does that do for him? Like, what is so effective about having a line like that can allow him to be able to do what he needs to do?
It does everything. I mean, it gives him confidence. And so we talk about creating doubt. As a defender, if you can't get to the quarterback and you start doubt your ability to rush the passer, Like, that's a critical win. And with a guy like Devon, where he can sit back there and he can thread the needle and he can get outside the pocket and make some plays out there, then you start doubting yourself in terms of, like, can we stop this guy? Right. And that creates hesitation on the part of a defender. And that is absolutely 100% the goal in everything you do in offense. It's why I'm such a huge believer in misdirection in terms of my offensive sets. And if I were an offensive coordinator, like, my offense would just be, it would be, just all eye candy, like just massive baskets of candy back there for the defenders to try and catch into. Because if you can create that doubt, that hesitation, that separation, it gives you just that much more of an edge. And one thing that allows Devon to do is worry less about the guys that are, coming down on him from defensive line or pressures or anything like that. Because especially if you get to a point to where you're on the same page in terms of protection schemes and everything like that. And we talk about that in such general terms, but it's really hard. And
it was hard last year. I think we learned a lot more of that last year when Isaac couldn't do that, right? Where the protections and having that kind of chemistry with the line didn't work out.
And, for Jaron Kump, for all his gifts, I don't know that he's always the best communicator. And it is hard to communicate from a center to a quarterback. Like, you can't turn around and just be like, hey, guess what? Because for one, it's very obvious. And two, like, you're playing in loud environments. And so the ability to communicate, so it gets more and more difficult. And so I think that's the benefit of having 5 returning starters. It's guys who play together. They understand this. They have that experience. It's a lot easier for them to just function, in whatever ways they need to. And they're going to have to communicate at times. But I think having been through the wars before gives them a much better advantage. And on top of that, just the advantage that it gives Devon Dampier is he just knows those guys are going to do their job. And so that allows him to focus on other things and getting receivers in position and recognizing coverages. And, if you can take things off a quarterback's plate in terms of, and this is, again, one of those areas that, like, Cam was so incredibly underrated, is his ability to get guys into protection and things like that, and they put a lot of decisions on Cam's plate. And as I talk to staffers at the U, like, sometimes they would kind of drift in, like, well, so-and-so didn't do this. And I was like, yeah, but, like, think about everything that you guys are asking to do with them. And they kind of like, and it's just like, I think the hard part about it is that Andy's scheme was always so brilliant, and if it was perfectly executed, it would have won time and time again. But you're asking, 18, 19, 21-year-old guys, even 24-year-old guys, to execute things that, somebody in their 50s and 60s had done for years, or thought about for so long. So there's always going to be that little bit of disconnect. I don't want to tangent off too much on that, but I just think that this system, the talent around him, I think that's part of the reason why Utah wants to go in the portal a little bit, is if you can get him more tools, if you can find some of those diamonds in the rough, whether it's through your high school guys that are coming in, anybody who can make that system just a little bit easier for Devon to run. I mean, you can see what he can do when he's given the time and the opportunity. He throws absolute dimes. And so, for a Utah team that needs to really build their identity in the Big 12, and I think that sounds absurd to say, but it's really the truth. Like, we don't know who Utah is as a Big 12 program, because last year was an anomaly, but, like, maybe it's partially because it's a new conference. Like, you are not the same juggernaut that you were in the Pac-12, and stylistically it's a very different fit. You're playing in different parts of the world that where you may have recruited for or recruited in, but you've never played in. And I think part of what makes college football so great is that it is a regional sport. Part of what makes it so difficult for Utah right now is that you're in 2 entirely different regions in terms of, you're in air raid country with a lot of the offensive stuff the Big 12 does, but also you're dipping into, the Cincinnatis, the West Virginias, and, the Florida parts of the world and parts of the conference. And that brings about a lot of different stuff that either Utah's not conditioned to seeing, or just, like, the little nuances. Because, I mean, you have to think about it in terms of, like, if you watch high school football in the state of Utah right now, it is a lot of passing. There is a lot of, heavy passing offenses. It used to be that it was all just, like, option run games. So back when I was in high school, it was just how many different ways can you run the option? And now you're seeing that it's a lot more 4 and 5 wide, teams because that's, what programs can do, and it's what you can replicate, and it's, the availability you have in players. And so, I think it's interesting that Corner Canyon's actually drifted away from that and gotten more into the run game and more into being a powerhouse program because they can attract that kind of talent. And so you see different levels of what comes out of high school, right? And that carries over because, in West Virginia, their primary area to recruit is the DMV. Florida, their primary area to recruit is Florida. Oklahoma State, Iowa State, all those programs, it's a lot of Texas stuff. And so the roots of all those high school teams bubble up into those programs and how we see it. And so I guess the point that I'm trying to make with all this is that Utah is still trying to define who it is as a program in the Big 12 because, some of it is that you want to, retain your identity as being a tough physical defensive football team, but also like you've got to implement some of this stuff because this is where you are now. And I think that's the nice blend of Devon Dampier and this offensive line and the work that Jim Harding's done in just recruiting guys and getting guys to stay and getting guys, I think underrated, like Roger Alderman played pretty well. I think Keith Olson played really well. I loved what I saw from Isaiah Garcia. Like I said, I have some concerns about the backup center spot. And that's not just because there were snap issues throughout the spring. It's just it's the way guys play, the way guys, the size and movement and everything like that. But when you see these second and third string guys playing like their first stringers, that's a really powerful statement to me, both about Utah's level of confidence, but also with the depth that they have at that position and how that all helps to maintain that identity of being a tough physical program while also having, the uniqueness of Devon Dampier who can make plays, seemingly out of nowhere.
And I can attest to watching, the few times that we got to in spring as media, he was playing with the first team guys, right? And it was a noticeable difference outside of the snapping issues because they had to switch out Kump every once in a while. But there was a noticeable difference in terms of the protection. Like, that defense is good, and they were really struggling to go against it in terms of being able to break through, right? Dampier, there were times, honestly, in some of these spring sessions that we got to watch where he could have just sat back there and just, had all day, And that affords him so much ability to be able to put that doubt into guys' minds that you were talking about, right? If he can stay back there, he's either got this great passing lane that's going to develop, or the longer that develops, the more things can break down, and then the defense has no idea what to do. And suddenly he can be the advantage player where he can just use his skill set. And so I think there's a ton of potential here where, look, you don't want him holding onto the ball for 7 seconds, right? Like, that's just not what they're going to try to do. They're going to try to get it out of his hands quickly, even with that protection. But at the same time, there's so much that can be done that hasn't been done in the past few years where you can see if he can have that same pocket awareness that maybe somebody like Cam did, it's unstoppable, right? Like, you just can't bring him down. But with that said, you've got to be able to have backups, right? You can't just rely on Devon Dampier. I think somebody said this in the press box as we were writing our stories. I can't remember who it was, but they said Utah better hope that Dampier can play the entire season, because outside of that, what do you have, right? And I think there's some truth to that. We did see two quarterbacks, we'll say 2.5, because Zerbrug got in there right at the end and scored a touchdown. But it was primarily Isaac Wilson and Bird Ficklin. And Bird Ficklin, they kind of limited some of his reps because I believe there's going to be a lot of interest in him based on the hype that's been going on. And so you kind of want to preserve some of that so he doesn't get these high dollar figures coming in the transfer portal, right? So there's kind of a game that you have to play there. But with that said, outside of Dampier, which, it took him a few series to develop. It took them a little bit longer. Wide receivers weren't catching passes all the time. Once he developed, it was different, right? The entire game changed with Dampier, and it seemed like that offense just couldn't be stopped. With that said, there were moments of success with these other two quarterbacks, with Isaac Wilson and Bird Ficklin. But with that, knowing that this is still a paired back offense, that it's a vanilla offense, did you see anything from either one of those guys that kind of led you to a QB2, QB3, or is it still too much to be? I mean, I've seen some of it in practice, and we've obviously seen Isaac and what he's done, and I will add the note that Isaac is always going to get the bad rap for how that season finished, and so he's always going to be in this uphill battle with the fan base trying to kind of reclaim his spot, that if he is QB2, people are going to want to see it. But at the same time, have you seen anything out of what you saw in spring that gave you kind of optimism about where Utah has behind Dampier?
Let me phrase it like this. I think I saw enough out of Utah as a team to make me feel a little bit more optimistic about what the worst case scenario would be is if you went into the backup quarterback. And what I mean by that is I think last year's offensive line was good. It was not great. Yeah. I think this year's offensive line is great. And I think they've got some running backs. I think they've got a system that fits if you have to go to a backup QB much more. You can pivot to things, which Utah could not do last year. And I think you heard it when they made the change at offensive coordinator, and I can't believe that our guy who took over for Andy Ludwig.
Jason Beck.
Midseason last year.
Bajakian.
Bajakian. He said the system is a system. And that was a very clear message to people of like, don't judge me off of this. And I don't think he was talking to fans. This is my favorite thing. Like, coaches are never talking to fans when they give things like that. Was him telling the coaching community, like I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah, exactly.
Like this, it is what it is, like, and I think it's not a knock on Andy Ludwig's system, because I think, again, the brilliance of Andy's system was it was also layered and built upon being able to do these things and having that base of if we get the quarterback play that we want, we're going to do just fine. And the scheme was built to, like, hey, if we run the ball, we can do this, we can do that, we can do all these other things. And I think the error was in believing that you can just plug and play anybody, and that you can just, and this is Utah's MO, is they just believe that they can always coach somebody up to be exactly who that is, exactly who they need. And I think I get it, because you've done it for so many years. You've taken so many Devin Lloyds who are 3-star safety prospects and turned them into, All-American NFL first-round draft picks. But I think the problem with that is that you just negate how differently people develop and the rate at which people develop. And so I think that circles back to my original comment. Like, the best advantage of having a great offensive line and a great running game for a quarterback is it allows that quarterback to develop at their own pace. And I think it's very, the tools that Devin has, where he's not the decision maker that Cam is, he has that escapability and that run ability, very similar to how Lamar Jackson uses his, that will keep him in games and will keep Utah's offense functioning in a way that will allow him to work through that development without having to be pressed. Mm-hmm. I think we saw a lot of pressure or pressing from Isaac Wilson last year, and that's where you started to see some trouble, because every time they got into a situation where it was like, hey, we have to have you win us this game, Isaac was just not there in a developmental sense. And it's not because the tools aren't there. I mean, he throws some great balls. It's the stuff that he's never had to do, the quick decision making, the multiple read stuff, getting everybody else on the page in terms of knowing the offense in and out. And I think, that was always the battle that I had with people when I would talk to them about Isaac, is it's not so much the tools and the physical abilities. It's that experience of playing quarterback that you just can't replicate. And it gets harder and harder and more difficult as you escalate every single level. And so I think this year's Utah roster is built a little bit better, and just simply because you have another year of experience up front and maturity. And I think, for Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu, it's really big, because those guys are so physically gifted that it's just now they have the experience, and so they have some confidence to dig in. I think for a guy like Jaron Kump and Tanoa Tongiai and Mike Mokofisi, it's that consistency of playing together so regularly, and that now ability to hold each other accountable, because who each other are, your strengths and weaknesses. That to me is always a big deal with offensive line play. And I know we're talking about backup quarterbacks, but I guess this is my awkward way of getting around the fact that, like, I don't disagree in the sense of, like, if Utah loses Devon Dampier, that it's going to be okay. We'll see what we got, but at the same time, I think there is a different there are opportunities for like where last year I couldn't see a true freshman, shining in that offense. I could see it this year, especially a guy like Bird Ficklin, where he has that escapability, he has that athleticism, and also he has a great deep ball.
He really does.
Like just it's impressive, And I watched his high school tape. He looks like a different player almost from now playing at Utah than he did in high school in a lot of ways. And I don't know if it's that he's matured physically more or what, but you've got some dudes that can do some things, and even Zerbrug, with the touchdown run that he had there at the end of the game, which I don't know if anybody else watched that. Maybe that's just me being the sicko that I am. He's got some run and some escapability. So you have options in terms of what you can do, and so it may end up being a backup by committee situation where you have 3 guys that have to do it, and if so, that's fine. But I think they're a lot better off with what they have, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Like, Isaac had a really tough year last year, and he fought through a lot of adversity. And I'm not going to be critical of a kid who's had the support of a family and grown up in a great community and everything like that. Like just because you had the football equivalent of privilege doesn't make you a bad person, right? But he had to fight through some adversity that was very different than what he's ever faced. Corner Canyon, it was just a success, ever since he was a sophomore almost. And that's not to say that life doesn't hand you adversity, because it does. But I think that experience for him is going to be monumental. And you could see, I had heard some things about, like, he had a couple practices where it was like, okay, we're going to see how much the young man can grow. And I think you saw it in the spring game where he came out and he was much more confident in his decisions. He was much more in control. You can see that just having been there before, his body language was so much better. And I'm not trying to infringe on Bill Simmons' body language doctor territory here, but he just seems like he's more mature.
Yeah.
And that is usually what happens when you go through the fire is you lose some of that, that kind of childish confidence, we'll call it, where you just kind of think you can handle everything, and you realize that you really have to put nose to the grindstone and do some things differently, and push through stuff. And I think that's going to be a big advantage to him. So I don't know, and maybe I'll phrase it this way. Do you feel like you're more confident in one or the other as the backup?
I don't know if confidence would be the right thing, because I don't know that there's you know what I mean? Like, I don't know that there's
I'm laughing because I don't think we're doing a very good job of reassuring fans. Like, we're trying to, like,
but I guess to that point, right? Like, I don't know that it matters as much this year. And I know that sounds crazy based on the last 2 seasons, right? But I think everything that you said, this system is so much better suited to whatever happens, right? Obviously, if Dampier goes down, Utah's season's going to change, right? And it's going to take a second to be able to change that. But I think whether it's Isaac Wilson, who now has a full year of maturation under his belt, where, like you said, growing up from the time that he played 7-on-7 to the time that he came to college, he had success. He won championships. He won everything. Like, everything was, great for him. That's not to say that he didn't have hard things in his youth, trying to be able to become a better player. He had to work hard. He always had to shake the Zach Wilson's little brother mindset, right? He had to do those things. But beyond that, he's now grown and he's understood, like, look, not everything is peaches, right? Like, I've got to come in here. He's said the right things. Now, some of that may be just lip service, but I truly believe that he understands that he wasn't good enough. Everybody knows that he wasn't good enough, right? But to that point, it wasn't fully his fault. If you understood how complicated Andy Ludwig's offense was, and then trying to get an 18-year-old who's still trying to figure out what it means to play at this level and expect him to be able to do that, then not to have Andy Ludwig, who he trusted a ton, and trying to figure these things out, like, it's just an impossible situation. You also had a running back room that was quite honestly crap. You had Mekhi Bernard, who did much more than he probably should have. Mekhi is generally not that type of a player to be able to put the whole offense on, and yet they still did it. The fact that he was able to do some of that stuff with literally nothing around him kind of shows the extent of where Utah was at. The whole system was flawed last year because it was built around Cam Rising as the only player that is going to play in this offense. And if it worked, it generally probably could have been a great offense. You saw what it was in that first half of that Baylor game. There was talk in that press box about Utah might get 60 points. I mean, like, it was a legitimate thing with how fast they were moving the ball, how effective they were moving the ball. It all went to crap. We understand that. We don't need to relive that. But I think Isaac has now got to face so much more adversity still. if he gets put into this situation and he is QB2, he still has to now fight off the narrative that he's a terrible quarterback, right? That all of the weight of that offense from last year is gone. Now, with that said, I do think this system is it's built so much better for Utah. If you need to be able to be more gadgetry, you got Nate Johnson, you've got Hunter Andrews, you've got all these guys in the backfield that you can put in, not counting any of the running backs who are way more dynamic than what I think Utah's had. I think this system works, right? So if you put Isaac Wilson in, you've got more experience. You've got a guy that has seen D1 football. If you put Bird Ficklin in, you get probably much more similar to what Devon Dampier plays, and you could probably run it fairly similar. Got the best ball of the bunch, but that's not to say that Isaac doesn't have a good ball. Isaac is always going to be that guy that is going to shoot for the stars, right? He's going to see that big play potential, and he's going to go for it, right? It's learning to dial him in. But more than anything, I think this offense has a natural system in it where it can breed confidence. It's those quick screen passes. It's those quick out route plays that that was the problem with Isaac last year is they didn't give him many plays to give him confidence. And so you got into this system and suddenly it was like, oh, Isaac now has to make a 3rd and 10 and it's going to be this terrible play that's, there's only one route. We saw that in the end zone or the red zone when he got in there. Okay, your only path is Caleb Lohner. Okay, Caleb Lohner's played 2 games before that, and that's the only guy that you're supposed to throw it to? You've got 2 bad things going on right now, and Utah's like, yeah, sure, let's try this, right? I think Utah's built in such a different way now, where as much as I say the quarterback doesn't matter, it matters, right? We get that. But I think it's built in such a different way that Utah can absorb a lot of what they couldn't do last year.
I'll phrase it in a way, and I'll take whatever heat people want to throw at me for this one. I think that if you put Wayshawn Parker at quarterback, Utah can still go 6-6 in the Big 12. And that's kind of a crazy statement, but what I'm trying to make, the point I'm trying to make is that you don't have to throw. And you made a really good point about Isaac. Isaac has insane arm talent, and if I'd been covering the team last year, that would have been one of those things where I would have tried to ask Kyle all the time, talk about Isaac's arm talent, because when it comes down to when you're in the fire, everybody reverts back to basic who they are, right? Yep. We can all do this. I'll put on my therapist hat for a second, and it looks strangely like a jazz hat right now, but we can do all this work and everything like that, but when the refiner's fire hits and when pressure really comes, that's when you figure out if the work you've done has really changed you. And I think Isaac last year, we saw, he reverted back to his true self, which is, I've got a strong arm, I'm going to throw it. And he did that a few times, and it just wasn't the right play. And I think, to your point, the offense wasn't designed to make mistakes. And I think that's the difference, is that this offense is designed with the mindset of we're not going to play perfectly every time. We're not going to out execute every single team and every single player on the opposite side. And I think it's interesting, but we glorify Mike Leach. His offense was one of the most simple offenses in the world. They just ran the crap out of it every single day in practice. And that's how they got good, and it's just he wasn't a quarterback whisperer. It's just the guys who lasted ended up being really good because they got a bajillion reps, and that is development to some degree. But I think this Utah system allows for a lot more of that plug and play development. There are outs, there are easier throws, there are things there are things that we saw in the offense this year that they had to incorporate last year. I will always flash back to, I think it was the Houston game where Isaac missed a little
yep, I know what you're
dump
talking
off
about.
Throw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was just people were losing their minds, and I'm like, I get it. It seems like it's such an easy throw to us. It's not when you haven't been doing it all year and practicing it all the time and getting that rhythm, because it is a tougher throw to throw side like this, And we all know, because we're all sitting at our desks throwing things at the garbage can, and how often we have to get up and put it back in.
Oh, I make it every time.
Right?
Come on, Brian. I don't even know. What are you even doing anymore, man? Just never miss.
They look down at the littered wrappers around my garbage can here.
I have it
maybe
2
it was
feet
just
away
an
from
offensive
me.
lineman thing.
Nope, it's definitely me.
But I think that's the point I'm trying to make. Is just it is an easy throw, and I get why people react and respond that way, because you're just it's right there, and Yet it's still one of those things that takes practice and repetition. And when you haven't done it all year, it looks terrible. Like there's just no other way to describe it. And so I think in a roundabout way, like, is Utah in trouble if they have to go to a backup quarterback? A little bit, but they're in a better situation this year because, and this is every football team. Like nobody's got 4 or 5 deep QB starters, like starting level QB depth. What I think you're hoping is that some guys can come in and do some things, and everybody else around the team steps up and plays at a level that allows them to get some things done. And I like the vibe in that room right now too. Devon is the clear alpha. He's not like a 25-year-old hanging out with 18-year-olds. He's closer in age, and like I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing about Cam, but Cam had just kind of gotten used to not having to be, like the older brother. He was just kind of like he was like the CEO, and everybody else was employees, right, in the QB room. And it's not to say he wasn't helpful or doing his thing. He was, but it was just a different, like when you've played in 2 Rose Bowls, you've done all the things, you've won 2 Pac-12 championships, there's just a different vibe. Like Devon is there as like the older brother who knows the system, he's been through it, and he's advising those guys. And it feels like there's a good camaraderie, good vibes there. And that guys are, more than anything, I think Isaac is bought in. And that's a strange thing to say for a guy who went into the portal. But like, he doesn't have another choice. Like if he goes into the portal again now, like that's bad.
Yeah.
The optics of that are bad. And I think that's a good thing for him because it's just like, hey bud, like sink or swim. It's up to you. And I believe that Isaac Wilson is going to swim, and I think he's going to find success. And I think especially in this system where it suits his, his skill set in terms of like he can be a little more freelancy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he's an undersized guy. He is only 6 feet tall, and it's maybe 6 feet on a good day if we're being honest. Like shout out to all of our 5'11" short keens who list themselves as 6 foot on their dating profiles. But he just this system allows him to move. It allows him to freelance. It allows him to be that guy that I think he is a little bit more naturally. Whereas the Andy Ludwig style is very regimented. It is Kyle's phrase that he loves is his mantra. We will not become you. You will become us. It's like you will become this kind of quarterback. This system allows for a little bit more like, hey, come as you are and we'll make you great.
No, I completely agree. And I think that there's a lot of things that Utah can do here. And that's why I think going into this, Utah feels much more optimistic about where they're at. As much of a struggle as it was last year, Utah is built differently. They have so much more talent and depth in terms of all the skill positions. Sure, there's things that the wide receivers need to catch more passes. They need more of the alphas in that room. They need guys to be able to be there. Obviously, you need to see more running back play, and Wayshawn Parker looks to be the guy, right? Like, and I've seen it in practice. He can be the guy. Then you've got a lot of this depth behind him that just really gives Utah a lot of fascination. But I think there's so much stuff that Utah can do that's different this year that I think really bodes well for this team. That's not to say that they're suddenly going to go undefeated in Big 12 play and, everything is at their disposal. But I think if things hit and things are there, you've got a great system in place for Utah. So, we went a little long on that, but I think, honestly, those are the position groups that people care about the most, right? Obviously, we could talk more about wide receivers, tight ends, and I think there's more that needs to be done there, right? And I think that's fine. Obviously, we want to be able to talk more about running backs and the defense. Defense, I unfortunately for Utah, defense just kind of gets overlooked because it is just always so good. But I think that's kind of where this is at, where I don't think people are worried about that. People are worried about, can the play structures work? Can Devon Dampier work and the guys behind him? How does this system work? Because they've been beaten down these last 2 years, and it's left such a bad taste in the mouth of the fan base where it's like you're so worried about any little thing, right? It was funny because going into last year, I made a case that Utah had done so well to kind of absorb injuries, right? They had their frontline guys, and in the past where it was like Zach Moss went down, suddenly Utah was toast, right? Tyler Huntley went down, Utah was toast. They had nothing to go, and it was really these star efforts from guys that were just living at the best of their peak, trying to make it so that Utah could win. Utah didn't really have that. They've built up into this place where they could, okay, now our second and third string guy could do it. And there was always kind of that mantra that Utah has finally arrived in the level where they had the Power 4 depth. They had the guys that could compete. And then suddenly last year happened and it kind of reverted, and everything like that could go wrong suddenly went wrong, and Utah fans just died, right? Like Utah itself died, right? Like there was a lot of just negativity around the program. Kyle Whittingham didn't know if he was coming back or if he was, what he was going to do. Did he really want to go out on a year like that? I truly believe Kyle was retiring after last year. Everything was leading to that, and I think it just left a bad taste in his mouth. It left a bad taste in everybody's mouth, that it delayed the progress of Morgan Scalley coming in. It delayed the progress of the program in general, of what they felt like they could do in the Big 12. And now this year becomes kind of a referendum on that, so to speak, right? They're going to be the underdog in a lot of respects. If people just are like, look, they can't live up in the Big 12. They can't do what they need to. Utah's come in as this big, boasting, pounding their chest guy, and they fell flat on their face, right? I think Utah loves that mentality, and I still believe that Utah needs to get back to that level where they need to be the team that accepts them as the top dog if they really, truly believe where they want to be. But right now, they're now back down, and they've got to figure out how to make that work. And I think that gives this team some hunger. I think it allows them to be able to move forward. But I think it also allowed them to pivot to a point where it says, look, if we don't make these changes, we are in a real world of hurt.
I think you heard it from the players a lot in their conversations and in comments to you guys in the media where they talked about, the vibes. I guess that's my buzzword today is vibes. But the feeling around the team, baby. And yeah, like HOTTOGO, right?
That's a taboo topic right now. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, right. We'll save that for later. But they all talked about, like Lander Barton specifically. I think Devon Dampier spoke about it a little bit as well. But just the feeling and the camaraderie of the group, right? And then we can talk about Morgan Scalley and Kyle Whittingham, the coaching staff, and how they may have planted the seeds a long time ago. That is entirely a player developed system. And I think I was talking with some people on Twitter the other day, and we were talking about Puka Nacua and how he kind of feels like he should have been a Utah guy. And I think that's a lot of really what this program has become. Is it's BYU has its place, and I'm not trying to start any rivalry smack with this, but Utah feels like a very very much the flagship for the past 10 years for the state of football and for people who love and live in that football culture. And so I think a lot of people gravitate towards that. Even guys maybe that didn't play at Utah kind of feel that camaraderie. One of my high school teammates is a guy that I think most people locally know. His name's Lodi Nata. And, he's got a boy who's playing in high school now, and his boy Sam is fantastic. He's going to be a great player, too. I can't imagine why. It's not like there's any kind of genetic code or
nothing happened there with that family.
No, it's not. I mean, his dad was an elite athlete. Mom was an elite athlete. Who'd have guessed? But
it's like the Bartons, right? Like, who would have expected that to happen?
Yeah. Like, how could you have predicted such a thing? But Haloti spent a lot of time around the program even before his boy was of that age, and it's just because it's nearby. You care about your community, you care about the football team, and so I say all this because people care about that program, and maybe even people that aren't inside of it. I think you and I care about it in the sense of we want it to be successful because that's good for business. I think it's good for the community as a whole. I think last year you just saw when Utah football is down, it's not good for anyone. People invest in this. They need a place to belong, and when that place that they belong is such a toxic environment, it's just not a good thing. That being said, I think we're away from the days of Utah just running things all the time, and Utah just being the leader of the pack. And I think that's a good thing because you said it success breeds complacency, whether we acknowledge it or not. It just happens, because you're so concerned leading from the front that you're always looking backwards rather than fighting forwards, and it's this delicate balance and everything like that. I think Utah's back to a hunger phase where they are not so much backs against the wall, but that chip on the shoulder is back a little bit, where it's like last year is not who we are. And for the guys who have been there, it's a big deal. For the guys who have come in, it's a big deal because they want to prove, for the guys who came in, they want to prove they made the right choice. And for the guys who have been there, they want to prove that was just an anomaly. That's not who Utah is. That's not what we represent. That's not who the culture is here. And so that hunger is a good thing. I think it's why they kind of closed the doors a little bit, for the last few months, and just circled the wagons, as people like to say, and just kind of really tightened up in terms of like, this is no longer about success and the things like that. This is about us being who we want to be, being the program that we want to be, and really solidifying those bonds. And normally I would complain about that because I like hearing about things, and I like that there's some ability to peek through the blinds, so to speak, and see what's going on in there. I think this year they really needed it. I think they needed to put those walls up and really kind of just get back to the fundamentals, because it is so easy to lose focus nowadays. It doesn't matter what you're doing. There's so many distractions out there. And for this team, I think it was good to get back to the fundamentals of who they are and who they want to be. And I think you saw that a lot in the spring in terms of just what guys said, the way guys, you can tell guys feel good about things up there. And that's, and I think to your point about Kyle, it felt like he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was just like the next day he wasn't. And I think some of it was he kind of washed the bad taste of how the season ended out of his mouth, and was able to tackle some things where he could feel successful again. And it's kind of wild to say, a man who's been through 21 seasons and won so many games, and the first ever to lead Utah to a Pac-12 championship, something that I believe was Arizona still hasn't gotten a Pac-12 championship, for as long as they were there. So you think of it in terms of those accomplishments, a man who's accomplished so much had to find some success of his own, whether it was through recruiting or getting into the offseason or whatever it was, in order to feel good again. And I think it just speaks to why this game is so difficult, but also why it's so why we love it so
addicting.
Much, because it's just, yeah, it is. I mean, I do this for fun, the podcasting thing, and you and I talk about stuff now and then. It's just, I can't get it out of my blood. I just can't. It's part of who I am, and it's part of, I have other things in my life that, I watched WrestleMania this weekend. That's a lot of fun. It's not the same as football. It just isn't. And I like to cook, but that's not the same as game day on a Saturday. And it's just, there's a different element to it that, I think people see and they feel and they want to be a part of, and we just want more of it. And I think for Utah, it's been so long since they've had a season like that. And it felt like, all the kind of stuff that they kicked down the road came to a head last season.
Yeah, I think it definitely had some struggles all around, where I think, you learn real quickly that things can change, right? And for as much as, everybody was going into the season saying, oh, look, Kyle Whittingham's going to go win his third, conference title in 3 different conferences, that's still a realistic thing. But I think there becomes this complacency. And I don't think that Utah was necessarily complacent, but I think based on kind of the moves beyond that allowed them to just kind of crumble, right? And I think you need those constant reminders. It's why, Georgia hasn't been able to repeat as a champion the last couple of years, because it takes a lot of effort. And if you're not constantly sharp and you're not constantly hungry, and you can put narratives out there and say that we're being disrespected and all that other stuff, like, unless you're actually doing the basic principles inside the program and you're doing those things and keeping guys hungry, it's really tough to stay on top, right? And so I think this gave Utah a great opportunity to be able to reset. I said one of the best things for Utah was going 5-7, because they would miss a bowl game and they wouldn't stay in complacency, and they could say, we have to change. And if we don't change, this is what it's going to be. It helped also that BYU was so successful last year, because that added to it, right? To your point, if you don't have anybody that's being successful by you, it doesn't matter. If Utah came in there and they had an okay season and BYU was terrible as well, I don't know that fully pushes Utah as well. I still think things would have changed, right? But I think when you have somebody that is now in your conference, a team that is now competing for these exact same recruits that you're getting, it helps, right? You're seeing them putting more money in, and you're doing different things. It allows you now that when you're going to those high school football games on Friday night, now there's much more of a charged reaction to it, where I have to have this player or else I can't do X, Y, Z, right? And I think that helps, because now you're in these battles that keeps that edge. And so to that point, I think all of these things can be good things, right? Like, nobody wants to talk about last year, and obviously it was down, right? I think I talked about it many times on the podcast, where we all go through our own crap, right? We all have our bad days. We all have our things. And so going, whether it's to football or basketball or other things, that is your entertainment. And to that point, it's in your blood, like you said, where you want to you feel it, right? Like Saturdays in spring, just suddenly like there's something about it. You can't put your finger on it. It's just like this natural thing that you have to just be a part of. And when that just crumbles, you saw a lot of frustrations. And then that carries over into men's basketball. And then it carried over into women's basketball. And like all of it just kind of like crumbled. And Utah fans were just left like defeated, right? And I think that's the hard part. When the entertainment side of it feels defeated, what do you have in life, right? The Jazz sucked. Utah Hockey Club gave us some stuff, but like all of these things around them, it just became this real struggle. And so it became a challenge and a frustration. So
this stuff can't become work. Like that's the bottom line. And it can't become like you can't turn your fan base into like workers, for lack of a better term, where it's just like, yeah, you have to clock in and you have to donate this much. There has to be that want to, that kind of intrinsic desire to give back to the program or to help push it forward, because it is returning the favor in terms of you're showing up on Saturdays and feeling, confident about either getting a win or you feel that sense of community or whatever it is, whatever dopamine hit that it is that you're gathering from being a fan. Like that can't be taken away and then continue to like, hey, we need more from you, right? And then I think the Jazz stuff, like it's funny, but I didn't grow up watching wrestling a ton, but I've gotten into it as I've gotten older in life because it is something that I can be consistent. Like I can consistently depend on it to hit, whatever it is that I look for in sports, right? Like it provides that community, people I can talk to. I got together with a couple of my buddies from high school and we watched WrestleMania on Saturday night. Like that's that's what sports is about. Is we all love the wins and everything like that, but it's what it provides in terms of being an uplifting aspect or feeding us. And I think you made a really good point about. I think it can be really hard when you're just the only one, or you feel like you're alone working. It can be really hard to measure yourself, and we don't want to compare all the time. But I think sometimes it helps to look over and be like, oh, BYU got Brock Harris. We got to get to work, right? And seeing some of the things that they were able to do in recruiting and getting some local guys, and I think when you see that, it just. The other thing, too, that I'm a firm believer of is high performers perform better when there's other high performers around them, and I think Utah a little bit last year felt like they were taking a step back or a step down into the Big 12, and justifiably so. Like you were up there with Oregon and USC and Utah and part of being the royalty of the Pac-12. And for the most part, those schools went on and Washington, Washington was up there. For the most part, those, like schools all went to the Big Ten and took a step back, except for Oregon, which took a massive step, in the direction that they wanted to go. But you were right there competing with them, and that was making you better too, because they were getting better. And then you came to the Big 12, and it felt like it was just a bunch of, I don't want to say leftovers. I've kind of called it the glorified Mountain West League, and I don't mean that in an insult, but it's just it's not the same brand.
Yeah.
I think,
there's too many different parts, I would say. It's not the same coherent. Even with Utah and Colorado in the Mountain West, the Pac-12 still had somewhat of a consistency, right? Like, obviously, most of that was based on the Pacific Coast, but it, like, still had kind of a general theme or vibe around the conference. This one, it's just so sporadic that it makes it a challenge.
Yeah, it feels like almost like a buddy comedy where like somebody's getting married and he doesn't really have any friends, and so like all the people around him send their like friends. There's an episode of New Girl that I'm thinking of specifically where I can't remember whose bachelor party it is, if it's Schmidt's or whoever's, but like, and they go out on the motorcycle ride. You've probably never seen this episode, but it's just this weird group of people that have never been together. And that's kind of what the Big 12 felt like last year. It was this kind of awkward mix of like, you had a bunch of schools that had been together in the Big 12, and you had all the add-ins from the year previous, and then you had, the Four Corner-ish group from the Pac-12 that was coming in, and it didn't feel like there was any kind of like, so why are we all here together? Like, oh, okay, and it still doesn't feel like. I think there's more animosity now, like because Utah kind of came in and from a fan perspective was just like, hey, yeah, we're gonna win everything, and then just stunk. But I think so. I think there's that element of it, but also I think people have had a chance to get to know teams and programs and interact, and so that builds a little bit more, at least familiarity, if nothing else. But also, I think there are some programs out there that like you're going to look at Utah, you're going to look at Oklahoma State, you're going to look at some of these programs that maybe were down a little bit that need to climb out. Teams like Houston that are building, Cincinnati that's trying to build. I think West Virginia is another one of those programs where they've feels like they've lost their way for a while now. But there's all these teams that really want to get back to that consistency of winning, and that's going to lead to, I think, a lot more interesting season this year for sure.
Oh, for sure. I believe it. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you joining me today, Bryan, and recapping a lot of the spring stuff. We've got a long summer, so I imagine we'll get a lot more of this stuff. I don't think we have to, go fully involved on everything, but, as the season goes, we'll break down positions, we'll break down these games, we'll do different things that way. But as always, man, I appreciate you joining me, so I don't know. What do you got to say for that?
I feel like this was the Reese's Eggs of podcast today, so I my basket is full after this. But I mean this sincerely, and I tell you this a lot. Like, you do a really great job covering the team. I think it's a transitional period for the industry, and you and Steve Bartle and some of the others have really carried the banner in terms of giving the coverage that Utah fans need. That we have to build that connection with the program, and it's why. I don't want to do this full time anymore. It took a lot out of me, and I like being able to jump on here and talk to you about it, because I think I still feel like, I see some things and hear some things and know some things, but more than anything, that's how I've grown connected to this program is talking about it in front of a microphone over the last few years, and it's a lot of fun. So I more than anything, I guess what I'm trying to say is thank you for letting me come on and talk to you, and for whoever decides to listen to this, thank you as well. I always said when I was doing it, as a job, that when you shared your time with me, that was the most valuable contribution you could make. And I truly agree with that. And so anytime you have me on, I'm going to do my best to try and make it entertaining. And we're going to wander through some weird scenarios and probably talk about candy and food at some point in time, and maybe quote some weird movies, but that's the journey. Like, everybody who knows me knows that's who it is by now. And I think the really fun part about it is that it's a way to stay, connected and build that community and do our own version of helping this program grow, because it's not just about getting Utah wins. I think really what it is it's developing, that pride and sense of something that we all share.
No, I completely agree, and I do appreciate when people do listen to us, because this isn't always the easiest thing to do. It's not necessarily my natural inclination at times, but I do appreciate it. So anybody that does listen, that it does go a long way, and it's appreciated. So with that, we're going to sign off today, and we'll catch you at another time. So thank you. Have a great day.